solutions.
And that was back when policy sometimes brought politicians together. Today's Republican politicians, they're not like that at all. I mean, they literally just spent the last 4 years claiming to back spending for infrastructure as Trump held standing infrastructure leaks, and now they flip-flopped who oppose infrastructure spending all because Biden supports it.
If the Republicans argue that we don't need infrastructure, the need not, they've been talking about the need for it for years now.
We are jeopardizing the future of this country by continuing to engage in this kind of deficit spending. I can't imagine that's going to be very appealing to many Republicans.
We should agree on something. If it's really bad...
I mean, they said it was appealing for 4 years. That's the Republican politicians. But then you have the voters. 1 out of 5 Republican voters are already backing Biden's new infrastructure bill. Most Republican voters back Biden's COVID recovery bill. And the split between those voters and their partisan representatives in D.C. is clear. Indeed, outside of D.C., there are even local Republican politicians who came out for that bill.
According to the polls, there is overwhelming bipartisan support.
It's not just Republican governors who are supporting the relief bill and asking for Biden's help. Republican-led cities and towns are seeking aid.
So many of our mayors have come out on both sides of the aisle because this is just the right thing to do.
400 mayors have come out and said they support this package. That's why Democratic and Republican governors have come out and said that.
True. Now it's early. But if Biden continues like this, he may keep cornering these D.C. Republican politicians by drinking their electoral milkshake. And you know what happened to some of those Reagan Democrats? Well, they kept voting Republican and eventually kind of became Republicans. And Joe Biden, with his diverse cabinet and his coalition and the signs of an increasingly broad governing economic agenda, can he do the same? Can he turn his Biden Republicans into Democratic teammates? Well, it's early, but there's new nonpartisan Gallup polling out today that finds the largest spike in people affiliating as Democrats in a decade. When asked the party that they either back or lean, now fully half of voters are Democratic, a big spike to 49%. Republicans, meanwhile, are down to 40%. Well, even after Reagan left office, his political realignment lived on. Politicos and reporters would track the impact of those Reagan Democrats in elections that went on even after Reagan's final term.
These quiet neighborhoods on Chicago's southwest side are the battleground for independents and Reagan Democrats. The home of auto workers, steelmen, firemen, and cops.
Reagan Democrats are largely blue-collar ethnic voters in the north and working-class whites in the south. They comprise about 10% of the electorate nationally and could tip the balance in 10 key states, including the battleground of the industrial Midwest.
Everyone wanted to see what they would do. Now, if you're old enough to remember the last presidential election, you might recall that even though Trump got fewer votes than Clinton in 2016, there were all these reporters and all these think pieces probing the minds of those Trump supporters out there in America. Well, real talk. Joe Biden recently thumped Donald Trump by a wider margin. He's now thumping McConnell with Republican support for huge federal spending. And I don't know about you, but I don't hear as much from the D.C. pundits about trying to learn the thinking of those Biden voters out there in real America, in the heartland, the women of color or the suburban populace or the public service workers. It is funny how the D.C. pundit empathy always seems to be so one-sided. Now, again, I can't stress enough how it is too early to know if Biden would be heading for a realignment years from tonight. But I can tell you this when you take it all together. Right now, he's winning over a broad coalition for big spending and big New Deal type programs. And he has some Republicans backing him. And that means right now, Mitch McConnell also keeps losing. That's our special report, but we've got some more news tonight. There's a new development since we were covering the Gates trial and the trial of his associate and the investigation into Gates. So I'm going to tell you what that update is. But first, we have a very special guest, Jared Bernstein, one of President Biden's economic advisors, live on the beat. Next.
You hear that? Yeah. 4 words no one ever wants to hear. I'm Mike.
this is my team at Northwestern Medicine. My nurses, my cardiologist, my cardiac surgeon, and my pulmonologist. Yes, heart and lungs, because blood clots in my lungs were causing my heart to fail.
Anchored by the #1 hospital in Illinois for 9 straight years, only Northwestern Medicine had the solution to save Mike. A breakthrough treatment that reached the remote clots deep in the lungs that surgery couldn't. Tiny balloons are used to gently open the delicate vessels, restoring blood flow. Not long ago, there was no solution. But Northwestern Memorial Hospital was the first hospital in Illinois to perform this life-saving procedure.
My team saved my lungs to save my heart. Now, we're both breathing easier.
Northwestern Medicine. What makes us better makes you better.
The last time I had a big bank was about 3 years ago when I ended all that and started my relationship with Chime. Banking with Chime is super easy. It's been such a wonderful experience. I don't even know what it feels like to be screwed by a bank fee. I'm thinking back and I'm just like, I try to suppress those dark days. Obviously, early payday, it's great. I don't have to worry about where my money is and if it's in good hands or not.
Download the Chime app today.
This is the sound of greatness. No shortcuts, no magic stars. Being great means being bad for a while.
Where are they?
Soon, there'll be something else.
I don't care. Come on. Charles!
There, language is learned.
Helping mothers is something that's always been very important to me, especially when it comes to hiking and mountain biking. For the new year, I turned to really help guiding with food sensitivities, and everyone well is so great just helping to showcase those foods that might not agree with you. So now I know I should probably be building off on the dairy when I'm doing a long, worry about eating the wrong thing or sick. Now I know exactly what I should say.
Did you know that every single flush brings odor onto your soft surfaces? Then they get released back into the air, so you smell them later. Ew, right? That's why Febreze created small spaces. Press firmly and watch it get to work. Unlike the leading cone, small spaces continuously eliminates odors in the air and on surfaces, so they don't come back for 45 days. Just imagine what it can do with other odors. At betterforthem.com.
Welcome back. All eyes have been on President Biden going big on infrastructure, the $2 trillion plan. And we are now joined by a renowned economist, former colleague, many may remember as an analyst. Jared Bernstein is now a member of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors. Good to see you here in your new role, sir.
Thank you very much. Great to see you as well.
In plain English, what's the most important things this bill does? And everyone can see the price tag. Who's going to pay for it?
I would say the most important things this bill does is it builds back better to an economy that is far more resilient, far more inclusive, far more racially equitable than the one that was here when President Biden took office. You were just talking about some of the political dynamics. Let me talk a little bit about some of the economics behind it, because I think it's very commonsensical. There are 400,000 schools and child care centers that have lead exposure in their water in this country, okay? So President Biden comes forth and says, I want to replace 100% of the pipes because no child in America should have any lead reaching into their water supply. And then you hear the opposition starting to talk about, well, our pipes infrastructure, and it becomes this Oxford English Dictionary debate. There are more than 30 million Americans who have limited or no internet access. Many of those folks live in both D and R parts of the country. And that's why you see mayors and governors often lining up behind these plans, whether it's the rescue plans, the fires behind us, or in this case, the jobs plan, to bring Americans onto the internet, which is obviously so essential.
You know, going to stay on that and then let you keep going, but on the point about how you define what's in there.
Come on!
I mean, one response to that is the Joy Behar response, which is who cares? Who cares what do you call it if the evidence shows that it's going to be good for schools and kids? But let me put up here for everyone's context. This was out of Politico. The question that's going to be dominating politics, they say, you dug right into it. $400 billion to expand home care services, support for care workers. Popular things, according to many. Laudable, they say, but is it infrastructure? What is the real point, though? Because do you at the White House, you speak for the president here, can you just say it's a big infrastructure bill that also does important things on jobs and justice and climate?
I mean, obviously, we have a broad interpretation of infrastructure, of the kinds of things, the kinds of policy architecture, or infrastructure is the word that comes to mind, it's probably redundant, that achieve the sorts of goals that middle-class, lower-income people need and don't currently have in this economy. So if you're someone who's trying to go to work, if you're a caretaker of an elderly person or a kid, and you'd like to be in the labor market, but that kind of child care structure doesn't exist in your neighborhood, we want to try to fix that, okay? And we talked about lead. We talked about the electric grid. If you're look what happened in Texas. I mean, if you're in a place where a fragile electric grid can knock you out for days at a time at great human cost, that's infrastructure that we want to replace. When we're talking about modernizing schools and community colleges and making repairs to veterans hospitals, you know, to us that fits very neatly under this rubric of building back an America that meets the needs of the people in ways that have just been underinvested in and ignored for decades now.
Yeah, and something MSNBC viewers may recall about you when you were an analyst is, unlike some people, you love talking about tax rates. It's just one of the things you're game to get into. You need Senator Manchin's vote on behalf of the president. Take a listen to what he's saying about the corporate rate piece of this.
I think corporate should have been at 25%. As the bill exists today, it needs to be changed. If I don't vote to get on it, it's not going anywhere.
Think they'll be back? Maybe, but I doubt it. We must have killed most.
So first of all, let me say that the reason I like to talk about taxes is because I have learned in my many decades in Washington that if you want to sustain a kind of infrastructure program as broad as the one we're talking about, that President Biden correctly views as essential to making this economy as competitive as it needs to be in the global stage, you have to fund that agenda. It's one thing to take a temporary program like the rescue plan, put that on the deficit. That makes sense to me. But for a longer-term program like this one, for some of the more permanent kinds of agendas that we're thinking about, that's where funding comes into place and revenues. Now, because of the Trump tax cuts, even as the economy was closing in on full employment before the crisis, we were collecting an historically very low amount of revenues. And this is really a backdoor way to shrink the government. Now, to some people, shrink the government probably sounds good, but when you talk about hundreds of thousands of schools and child care centers that are exposed to lead, when you talk about the absence of internet access, when you talk about the fragility of the talk about the failure to invest in clean energy and electric vehicles, well, then you start to understand where President Biden is coming from. An amply funded government that will support the resilient and productive investments, inclusive, racially equitable investments that have gone unsupported for too long. And to have to pay for that that's highly progressive, that doesn't hit anybody under $400,000 of income, that just makes a lot of sense.
All very interesting stuff. It's such a big issue. Jared Bernstein, as mentioned, good to have you back in this context. I hope you will join us again.
Of course.
Thank you, sir. Coming up, some Republicans actually say the quiet part out loud on voter suppression. We have the tapes. And as mentioned, there's a late-breaking development linked to Matt Gaetz. We have that for you tonight as well.
All right, son.
Sure, Pop.
I've been dealing with digestive
Can I go see the house?
pretty much since college. I mean, I couldn't go see a doctor at this time. I
some time.
test, and it looked pretty simple to do.
It's quite a place you got here.
And easy, and I was like, you know what? I'm at home. I'm gonna try it.
Oh,
I've seen a big difference. I feel better. I feel less bloated. And it was amazing to me that
Who's my new rival?
a small little
Oh, that's
fingerprint
Rufus.
to
He's
give me
loyal,
that
dumb, and
background
angry, so
that I've been
reminded us
looking
of you.
for a while.
That's your idea
Did
of a
you know
joke,
that
miss?
every single flush flings odors onto your soft surfaces? Then they get released back into the air, so you smell them later. Ew, right? That's why Febreze created small spaces. Press firmly.
Still a bitch, Abigail.
Get to work. Unlike the leading cone, small spaces continuously eliminates odors in the air and on surfaces, so they don't come back for 45 days. Just imagine what it can do with other odors.
Hey Google, turn up the heat.
Behold the Tree Dasher by Allbirds. The planet's first proper running shoe, made from natural materials like, well, trees. Mile after mile after mile. The Tree Dasher keeps your feet going while reducing your carbon footprint. Break a sweat, not the planet. Allbirds.
Your most life-changing sleep is about what's underneath. This is a Casper mattress. Inside, precisely 1,501 perforations create a cooling system so effective, you won't be awake to notice. Only Casper mattresses are made with 86 supportive gel pods to align your spine and eliminate aches and pains. It's the cooling, supportive comfort you need for the most refreshed feeling each morning. Only on a Casper mattress. Only at Casper.com.
I've had acne. Now, I don't.
It started with clogged pores. Add stress, sweat, and bam, breakup.
First it's a pimple, then hyperpigmentation. I didn't need concealer. I needed better skincare.
Now, Extrology.
A custom formula created by a dermatology provider.
Made with powerful prescription ingredients.
Selected for me.
Because my skin,
It's different.
and now my skincare is too. Try 30 days free at Curology.com.
I've been having stomach troubles. It's either yogurt, pork, or citrus. Or almond. Or maybe it's cinnamon. Now, I could start by removing a lot of things from my diet and adding them back in one at a time until I find the culprit. Or I could find out what might actually be bothering me before removing and adding foods back in again. I'm gonna do that.
Did you know that every single flush flings odors onto your soft surfaces? Then they get released back into the air, so you smell them later. Ew, right? That's why Febreze created small spaces. Press firmly and watch it get to work. Unlike the leading cone, small spaces continuously eliminates odors in the air and on surfaces, so they don't come back for 45 days. Just imagine what it can do with other odors.
Green light.
As Republican lawmakers continue to push voter suppression bills, we're seeing this in different parts of the nation, some are also starting to say the quiet part out loud, that their goal is to stop people from voting, and depending on how you do it, that itself is an illegal goal. Here's a top elections official in Mississippi. This is the Republican Secretary of State. The job is to protect the right to vote.
Think about all these woke college university students now who will automatically be registered to vote, whether they wanted to or not. You got an uninformed citizen who may not be prepared and ready to vote. Automatically, it's forced on them. Hey, go make your choice, and our country's going to pay for those choices.
So he's going to decide who he thinks is actually ready to vote. A Republican official saying that also so-called woke young people shouldn't have it easy, shouldn't be allowed to vote in an easy manner. The Conservative National Review published an article titled, "Why Not Fewer Voters?" saying the Republic would be better served by having fewer but better voters, ? It's all out in the open, folks. Look at who they're trying to stop from voting. And then look at what they mean and imply when they say it's time for only better people to vote. This used to be the kind of thing that the modern Republican Party over the last few decades, whatever it was doing on paper, it would be more implicit. You would rarely see it admitted out in the open this much, certainly back in the Jim Crow era, but not, say, in the last 20 years as much. Now, last month, an Arizona Republican lawmaker also said, quote, everybody shouldn't be voting, and quantity isn't important. If quantity is important, we have to look at the quality of votes as well. In 2018, Mississippi Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith also said the goal would be to make it harder for liberal folks to vote. You can see how these ideas spread. Back in 2018, about 48% of Republican voters said everything possible should be done to make voting as easy as possible. That basic concept has now dropped precipitously to 28%. We live in a country where voting for too long has been too hard for reasons we all know. Sexism, racism, not everyone was allowed to vote initially. We all know that. But there has been of fighting and dying so that there would be some attempt to have universal suffrage. And if you go back far enough, the Democratic Party had its own problems on that. But today, what you see is a Republican Party not only doing everything possible to make it hard for you to vote, telling you they're going to prevent you from having food and water in line when you wait to vote, and then speaking openly as they do things that explicitly go after certain people, young people, liberals, the Biden coalition, and a lot of black people, and say their goal is to make sure only the better people vote. It all follows the lead of you-know-who.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
And that's an admission, if there ever was one. That was our special comment on that. When we come back, we have the update on a criminal case relating to Matt Gaetz. The update we just got during this hour, that's next.
Hi, my name is Leanne. I have been going through some stomach pains and problems for quite a while and came across the Everly Well test. Everything was easy to understand and was just really excited to see what the outcome would be, and come to find out that almonds were on my high sensitivity list. And so just was so eye-opening that even though I was eating clean, something within that clean list could potentially be causing me inflammation in my body. Thank you, Everly Well.
Hey Google, turn up the heat.
Behold the Tree Dasher by Allbirds. The planet's first proper running shoe, made from natural materials like mile after mile after mile. The Tree Dasher keeps your feet going while reducing your carbon footprint. Break a sweat, not the planet. Allbirds.
A lot can happen with a simple tell your story. Get people excited, to get connected, to share, and sell anywhere, and start making a different future. Start different at GoDaddy.com.
Looks good, guys. Success! It's all in right place, right time. Fiverr gets that. From graphic design to web development. We're even a PR expert for things like, I don't know, booking a restaurant.
to respond. First to put others' lives before their own. And in an emergency, they need a network that puts them first, that connects them to technology, to each other, and to other agencies. That's why AT&T built FirstNet with and for first responders. The Emergency Response Network authorized by Congress. FirstNet, because putting them first is our job.
Did you know gravity and relativity were discovered by people working from home? Do you know what I discovered? Kale. Curly, dinosaur, red Russian, ornamental. Instacart opened my world to all kinds of discoveries. I discovered organic, wild-caught, vegan lip gloss. I discovered this, that, these, and I'm just getting started. Instacart. More stores, more to discover. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first order.
The future of fitness isn't dumbbells. It's revolutionary digital weight that learns as you get stronger. So you can be your strongest. Tell me, now at 40 Nordstrom locations nationwide.
Your walls may be thin, but at least their internet is private.
Privacy is very important.
It sure is, Frida.
X5 Advanced Security keeps all your connected devices protected from network threats. Click, call, or visit a store today.
Why would your kids need a Greenlight debit card?
Imagine a debit card and app designed to help them develop healthy financial habits, to teach them how to save and encourage them to set their own goals. Now imagine the difference it could make in their lives, in their futures. Greenlight.
We made USAA insurance for busy veterans like Kate. So when her car got hit, she didn't waste any time. She filed a claim on her USAA app and said, that was easy. USAA, what you're made of, we're made for.
Particularly, I don't really like fishing.
Do you like eating though?
Late breaking news, there are new indictments against Joel Greenberg, that's the former Florida tax collector and associate of Matt Gaetz, whose own investigation tipped off authorities to Gaetz. That's why the Republican Congress was under review. Federal prosecutors in Orlando now charging Greenberg late today with conspiracy, bribery, and stealing tax dollars to allegedly buy these cryptocurrencies online. Greenberg had pled not guilty this afternoon. He faces 33 federal charges in total. That includes some of the most salacious, the sex trafficking and sex with a minor. As mentioned in our coverage, he's due in court tomorrow. The new indictments do not shed any light, to be fair, on Gaetz' own role, potential or otherwise, in these investigations. But it does follow the New York Times report that Gaetz, for reasons only he knows, proactively sought out the Trump White House because he wanted a blanket preemptive pardon for himself. A pardon for criminal conduct or some other allegation that he thought might be necessary.
You're a low dick. That is definitely your son.
We'll be back here tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a final word, you can always find me online at Ari Melber on social media. The Readout with Joy Reid is up next.
Good evening, everyone. We begin the Readout tonight with the latest on the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Now, let me repeat. This is the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin and no one else. The crowd of people who witnessed the police kill George Floyd are not on trial. And neither is George Floyd himself, as the defense seems to be trying to suggest. Let's be clear. Derek Chauvin is the man who, as we've learned from his former colleagues, was not following police department procedures and policies when he held his knee on George Floyd's neck
Rufus,
for
behave.
9 minutes. Use of force expert Jody Steiger, a sergeant with the LAPD, returned to the stand today and made it clear that force should not have been used once George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground, and that the risks were very well known.
Because at the time of the restraint period, Mr. Floyd was not resisting. He was in a prone position.
And hours later, they've
he was handcuffed.
Ain't you just the leading authority on everything?
Well, ain't it so?
Evade, he was not attempting to resist, and the pressure that was being caused by the body weight
Hard to
would
catch.
could cause
Real
visual
good.
asphyxia,
Hard to
which
catch.
could cause death.
Get your excuses in
2
early.
days ago, the emergency room doctor who
who's owned by a
received
complaining
Floyd at the
know-it-all?
hospital
Come on,
said it was
son.
his belief
I'm sorry.
that the cause of Floyd's death
yeah.
was, in fact, a lack of oxygen.
alright. Come
The
on,
defense
let's
is
fix.
trying its best to dispute that. During a longer than
Kicks a
usual
dick, John. Your kicks a dick.
Nelson put the spotlight on George Floyd. Nelson played part of a police body cam video and claimed that Floyd can be heard saying something that I frankly can't imagine anyone has ever heard anyone say. Quote, I ate too many drugs. And after getting the next witness, James Ryerson, the Minnesota law enforcement agent in charge of investigating Mr. Floyd's death, to initially agree with him, Ryerson then undercut the defense in his recross by the prosecution.
You want to set the hook in time.
Did you hear that?
Stay calm.
There's a appeal that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many
Not
drugs.
real.
Having heard it in context, you're able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there.
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd is saying, I ate too much drugs.
Now, according to the defense, George Floyd's history of drug use should be fair game, but Derek Chauvin's past history of multiple complaints against him as a law enforcement officer should be off limits. The defense also wants to focus on the menacing crowd that must have had the police officers scared for their lives, a terrifying mob that included smartphone-wielding teenagers and a 9-year-old girl. Now, it's worth asking whether anyone could reasonably consider that small but yet increasingly agitated crowd, which was crying out for mercy for George Floyd and getting no response from Chauvin and the other officers, could anyone really consider them to be a threat?
I don't know. Relax.
When you reviewed the body worn cameras, did you see anybody throw any rocks or bottles?
No, I did not.
Did you see anyone physically attack the officers?
No, I did not.
Did you hear foul language or name calling?
There was some name calling, yes, but and some foul language, but that is about the most of it.
Did that factor into your analysis?
No,
Why not?
because I did not perceive them as being a threat.
And why is that?
Let me come help you look.
Because they were merely filming, and most of it was their concern for Mr. Floyd.
Steiger also added that given Chauvin completed more than 800 hours of training over his nearly 2 decades on the force, he should have been well prepared to handle such a threatening horde of bystander rapscallions. Joining me now is Paul Butler, professor at the Georgetown University Law Center and a former federal prosecutor, and Kirk Buckhalter, professor at New York Law School and a former NYPD detective. And I want to go to you first, Mr. Buckhalter, because you were a police officer. Mr. Steiger, who was a defense expert who they brought in from the LAPD, he testified that he himself, as a police officer, had faced real hostile crowds. Not like a 9-year-old girl and some teenagers who were filming and yelling, but people throwing rocks and bottles. Can you sort of delineate for us, just as a law enforcement officer, you faced crowds, right? Crowd impact whether or not you're allowed to use deadly force on somebody that you're holding.
Well, it's a good question, Joy. Thank you for having me. So a crowd can only impact that use of deadly force if for some reason that crowd is perceived to be a threat. Now, I will say that, if you have an issue with people cursing at you and yelling at you in the police department, it's no place for you to be employed, because this is something that people do. And we have something called the First Amendment in this country. And this is a country where folks can express themselves and express their thoughts and so forth with government. That's a big difference between perceiving a crowd as a threat, a group of people as a threat. And I'll just go a step further. That if that crowd was not a crowd of predominantly African American people, this argument would not pass the last test. Right? So we see crowds of people all the time engaged in all types of activities, but it's a narrative here that for some reason this crowd was a threat. And let's go a step further. If you perceive it as a threat, well, perhaps it's because you were engaged in the act of snuffing the life out of someone in front of them. So there is just so much irony here with regards to the defense's approach to this crowd.
Absolutely, and I apologize, I mispronounced your last name, Mr. Burkhalter. Thank you very much. Appreciate those points that you're making. And Paul, we have seen crowds of white armed citizens, barraging into state houses, wielding AR-15s, and because they're mad about having to wear masks. We've seen people who are pro-open carry wielding AR-15s walking down the street yelling at police, telling them, you don't have the right to disarm me. Like, we've seen people get in the face of the police. Those people don't get shot. Those people don't get held to the ground and choked out. So that argument seems to me to be pretty ludicrous. But I want to point you toward, you can comment on that, but there was, I thought, an even more absurd argument made by Mr. Nelson today. And that is that he's trying to claim that George Floyd, while being held down in the car, said, I ate too many drugs. Which strikes me as something that no one has ever said ever in life, rather than, I ain't done no drugs, which is what you can hear him say. Your thoughts on that?
So first, the problem with the defense argument about the crowd is that last week the jury met the people in the crowd. The brave teenage girl who made the video, the EMT first responder who begged Chauvin to let her take Mr. Floyd's pulse, Charles McMillan, the older gentleman who broke down in sobs because he couldn't save Mr. Floyd's life. The crowd doesn't look like a vicious, angry mob. The jury might think the people in the crowd dealt with Mr. Floyd more responsibly than Chauvin did. And unfortunately, the prosecutor has to respond to the argument that Mr. Floyd died of a drug overdose, and this is just the beginning of a long, dirty pathway. So next week, the defense has its own videotape from an arrest of Mr. Floyd in 2019. It starts out like his encounter with Chauvin. Cops approach the car, they take out their gun, and Mr. Floyd then appears to swallow some pills. And that time, the cops took him to the hospital. So the defense wants the jury to think that Mr. Floyd did the same thing when Chauvin arrested him, but this time, when he swallowed the pills, they killed him.
Here's the problem with that, in my mind, and you are the expert, sir, and so I'm going to ask you, Mr. Burkhalter, if, in fact, George Floyd swallowed some pills in the back of the squad car and was in the process of having a drug overdose that the officers deemed could be fatal, would the appropriate law enforcement response be to sit on him for 9 minutes while he died, rather than use the Narcan that we keep hearing about and trying to stop the drug overdose, or otherwise trying to save his life? Because staying on top of him and putting 3 people's full body weight on him does not seem like the appropriate law enforcement response to a drug overdose, even if you think that's what's happening.
That is absolutely correct. So the police have a duty to not only care for the lives and health welfare of victims, but the lives and welfare of those whom they arrest. There is no sliding scale with the United States Constitution. So if the police believe that he was in some type of medical distress, they had a duty to take some form of action. Narcan, call EMS immediately, certainly not just keep your foot on on his neck for 9.5 minutes. And that's very important, 9.5 minutes. So if one did believe that he was engaged in some form of medical emergency, overdose, and so forth, that's 10 minutes. I mean, we haven't even been talking for 9.5 minutes. Your show hasn't been on for 9.5 minutes yet. This is how long the police witnessed this man in medical distress and did not take action. So once again, that argument, really shouldn't fly.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to really quickly play George Floyd's brother. This is Rodney Floyd, who had some comments about the treatment of the experts, by the way, many of whom are themselves law enforcement. Here's what George Floyd's brother had to say.
These are expert witnesses. They're well qualified in their field, and just watching the strategies he used, try to just find the crack in these men and women that's testifying about the expertise, all the training they had. And that just blows my mind, just the tactics they use to try to break down the credible witness.
What do you make of that, Paul? Because it does seem like once as you said about the witnesses, the jury's now met these witnesses and they're quite esteemed, and the prosecution's gone a long way towards saying, tell me about your background, tell me about how you got into law enforcement. Is it a good tactic to try to undercut their credibility?
So, George, defense cross-examination is a bunch of jabs, which is typical. It's hard to score a knockout punch against experienced witnesses like expert witnesses. So they're trying to say that Chauvin still needed to pin Floyd down because at some point Floyd could have suddenly started fighting. But The expert said that police don't make life or death decisions about the use of force based on what somebody possibly might do. They're supposed to assess what's actually happened.
Right. And, you know, Mr. Burkhalter, the other sort of argument is the sort of awful but lawful argument that we heard made today, that it may look bad on camera, but it's legal, and therefore one should exonerate Mr. Chauvin. But it feels a lot like kind of the Rodney King argument, what you just heard Paul Butler say, that essentially, you know, once a black man has any drugs in his system, he's sort of like Superman. He's going to rise from the dead, even though he's in complete arrhythmia, has no pulse, and is therefore essentially dead. But he's going to somehow rise from the dead and become a threat to 4 officers. That feels very Rodney King. Do you think that that argument still works, you know, what, 30 years later, however many years, decades later?
No, I don't believe it works. And one primary reason is police officers make arrests with regards to people who resist every single day. If this was standard operating procedure, someone would die in police custody once every 5 minutes. And it simply doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen because, as you saw, the litany of law enforcement officials testify that there are standards. When someone ignores those standards, crosses over the line, this is what happens. So that doesn't occur. And then this drug Superman, you know, this plays into another wildly unfortunate narrative in this country. And let's just face the facts that George Floyd is a very tall, large black man. And in some ways, the argument that's being propagated here is that he was to be feared based on who he was before you even had a chance to speak to him or know him, right? Just based on his appearance. He's someone to be feared. So these arguments are somewhat disturbing. Yeah.
Somewhat, yeah. No, they're quite disturbing. But like that he's the literal boogeyman. That even after he is dead, he still poses a threat to officers, as you said, because it is this myth about black men that are literally the boogeyman. It is absolutely shocking to see that done in the 21st century. But I appreciate both of you, Paul Butler, Kirk Burkhalter. Thank you both for being here this evening. Still ahead on the readout. New reporting suggests that, thank you, that Matt Gaetz sought a preemptive pardon from Trump while he was still in office, which raises new questions about when Gaetz knew that he was under investigation for alleged sex crimes. Plus, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says corporations should stay the heck out of politics. Keep the money coming to the GOP. And later we'll talk with St. Louis Mayor-elect Tashara Jones about her historic victory last night. And you won't want to miss tonight's absolute worst, as a Republican attempt to spread disinformation about new voting restrictions falls flat on its face. The readout continues after this.
So you happy?
I think so.
I did good?
You did good.
The future. It's impossible to see. And when it's finally here, it might not be what you expect. It might just be better.
Come out here.
Introducing Luxury Electric.
You're alive. John, it's
Introducing Lucid Air.
well, how'd you know she...
Sorry, I thought
Some companies still have HR stuck between employees and their data, entering data, changing data, more and more sensitive personal data. And it doesn't just strand HR down. It drags the entire business down with inefficiency, errors, and waste. It's ridiculous. With Paycom, employees enter and manage their own data in a single, easy-to-use software. Visit paycom.com. Schedule your day today.
My husband, he ain't looking for
If you want to get back to your favorite places and feel confident they have put your health and safety first, look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
I'm Dr. Richard Carmona. This is the Well Health Safety Seal from the International Well Building Institute, the global authority on healthy buildings. The Well Health Safety Rating was informed by years of research and input from hundreds of leading virologists, public health experts, epidemiologists, and building professionals around the world.
The Well Health Safety Seal means that we'll feel better going into restaurants, theaters, stores, hotels,
stadiums, all the places that we look. Everything may look the same, but the Well Health Safety Seal means that your health and safety are top of mind when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing procedures,
air and water quality management,
emergency preparedness programs, and health services.
So look for the Well Health Safety Seal outside and feel more confident going inside.
Learn more at wellhealthsafety.com.
Join the savvy customers who for decades have been using RockAuto.com to access the info hidden behind parts counters to take advantage of reliably low prices.
I'm sorry. I came by because I was riding by Jason Fella and I thought John wanted to earn some
As
extra
Carl
money.
wonders if she can retire sooner, she'll revisit her plan with Fidelity. And with a scenario that makes it a possibility, she'll enjoy her dream right now. That's the planning effect from Fidelity.
Came down from.
We believe in best friends and new
How much
friends.
does it pay? It pays good.
At Del Webb, we believe in growth,
Okay.
movement, and the awesome power of a get-together.
Micah?
We believe in beautifully designed homes
All right.
with
John
innovative
Marston,
floor plans
let's go.
and
You
living
bring him back
exactly
to
how
me.
you want to
You
live,
hear? Of course.
surrounded by people who make life better. Del Webb.
That woman got problems.
The world looks different. Suddenly, you're comfort conscious, but also more Mother Nature conscious. It's why we at Honest designed the new clean conscious paper, mindful of your babe's delicate skin and the environment. Did you know the source of odor in your home could be on your soft surfaces? Odors get trapped in your home's fabrics and resurface over time. Febreze Fabric Refresher eliminates odors. Its water-based formula safely penetrates fabrics where odors hide. Spray it on your rugs, your curtains, your furniture, all over your home to make it part of your tidying up routine. Febreze Fabric Refresher for an all-over freshness you'll love.
Leanne, I have been going through some stomach pains and problems for quite a while, and I came across the Everly Well test. Everything was easy to understand, and was just really excited to see what the outcome would be, and come to find out that almonds were on my high sensitivity list. And so just was so eye-opening that even though I was eating clean, something within
You're stupid, John.
potentially be causing me inflammation in my body. Thank you, Everly Well.
President Trump should pardon Michael Flynn. He should pardon the Thanksgiving turkey. He should pardon everyone from himself to his administration officials to Joe Exotic if he has to, because you see from the radical left a bloodlust that will only be quenched if they come after the people who worked so hard to animate the Trump administration. So I think that the president ought to wield that pardon power effectively and robustly. The president should pardon himself, his family, his administration officials, and any of his supporters who've been targeted.
Any of his supporters who've been targeted, as those clips would suggest, Congressman Matt Gaetz had presidential pardons on his mind in the weeks after Donald Trump lost re-election. Now, the New York Times has revealed that in the final weeks of Trump's term, Gaetz privately asked the White House for blanket preemptive pardons for himself and unidentified congressional allies for any crimes they may have committed. That's according to two people told of the discussions. Now, they know that the White House viewed the request as a non-starter. Now that we know that Gaetz is the subject of a federal sex crimes investigation, he would have had ample reason to want a pardon from the president he defended so vigorously. Times notes that it is still unclear whether Congressman Gaetz or the White House knew at the time about the inquiry. However, some Trump associates have speculated that Gaetz' request for a group pardon was an attempt to camouflage his own potential criminal exposure. And there were other hints that Gaetz may have known that he was under investigation, including his tweet naming any potential scandal the Gaetzgate just 5 days before the news of the probe first broke. But even if Gaetz wasn't specifically aware that he was under investigation when, according to the Times, he asked for a pardon, he had known since August that his friend Joel Greenberg was under indictment for child sex trafficking. It's not every day that your buddy is accused of engaging in sugar daddy relationships, so it might have been at least crossed his mind that he too could be under scrutiny. After all, Gaetz was close enough with Greenberg to describe him as his wingman, according to Politico, which reports that they had shared more than one girlfriend. Greenberg has denied the charges against him, and likewise, Gaetz denies engaging in the conduct of an investigation. But he won't say when he first learned that he was under investigation, even when asked point blank by his favorite news network last week.
How long has this investigation been going on? Do you know?
I don't know.
When were you first informed of it?
You know, again, I really saw this as a deeply troubling challenge for my family on March 16th. Really, on March 16th was when this got going from the extortion standpoint.
With me now is New York Times Washington correspondent Michael Schmidt, who broke this story, and Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor. And Michael, I want to start with you. I should note that Trump today denied that Gates ever asked him for a pardon. Here's the quote: Congressman Matt Gates has never asked me for a pardon. It must also be remembered that he totally denied the accusations against him. That's Donald Trump talking. But your reporting leaves a lot of questions open for me. So Gates allegedly, per your reporting,
man got messed up.
Unidentified congressional allies. Do you have any idea or any reporting on who those allies might be, and whether allies means members of Congress or congressional staff?
I'm here to arrest you on behalf of
We wrote as much as we knew about this request that was made. And it's sort of interesting, if you look at Trump's response, Trump says that Gates never asked him himself. Our story specifically says that the request went to White House officials, and it was unclear whether he had engaged with the president himself. Now, Trump has been very quiet on the Gates issue since this came out a little bit over a week ago. He said very little about it, basically just that one statement. And, you know, there looks like there is a sort of concerted effort to put some distance between the president and Gates. Hey! It's important to understand what Gates was looking for. Gates was looking for sort of like the ultimate hostility. Come on! The limits of pardons in ways, and he did them, he wielded his pardon power in ways that legal experts and lawyers were very surprised by, whether it was giving pardons to people that had not cooperated in investigations into him, or donors or allies and such. What Gates wanted was basically a get-out-of-jail-free card for everything he had done in his life. And no matter what Trump did, there was nothing that rose to that level in the pardons and computations Trump gave.
And let me ask you this follow-up, because the other character in this is William Barr, who was very eager to protect Trump's friends whenever he got the opportunity. We know this investigation began under William Barr. Is there any reporting that William Barr might have communicated to the White House, to the president, the then president, Donald Trump, about the investigation of this ally of his in Congress?
No, I have no evidence of that. And in regards to Barr, the investigation was open under Barr, and Barr allowed it to move forward and gave essentially the approval for it to move forward. And, you know, in most Justice Departments, that would not be a significant thing, but in the way that Donald Trump politicized investigations, it does sort of make it notable in this case. But there's no evidence that, there is evidence that Barr allowed this investigation to move forward, and would essentially have had to sign off on it because it was a special, you know, sort of person, a designee, being a national politician in the Justice Department's eyes.
Yeah, and we do also have reporting, I believe it was, it might have been Politico, that Barr took steps to make sure he was physically distanced from Gates and not appearing with him publicly. We've got Glenn, we have your short back, Glenn, so I want to ask you about this other breaking story tonight. This just came out. This was CBS Evening News that broke literally within the last hour or so. CBS News reporting that Gates' trip to the Bahamas is part of a federal probe into this sex trafficking allegation. Here's a little bit of it. Federal investigators are looking into a Bahamas trip Matt Gates allegedly took in late 2018 or early 2019 as part of an inquiry into whether the Florida representative violated sex trafficking laws. Gates was on that trip with a marijuana entrepreneur and hand surgeon who allegedly paid for the travel expenses, accommodations, and female escorts, the sources said. Investigators are trying to determine if the escorts were illegally trafficked across state or international lines for the purpose of sex with the congressman. A spokesman for Gates' office said what began with blaming headlines about sex trafficking has now turned into a general fishing exercise about vacations and consensual relationships with adults. Can you lay out for us the significance of that aspect? Because this is now allegedly travel outside of the United States.
Yeah, and, you know, Matt Gates can protest all he wants. He can, you know, use his old boss's line of this is a witch hunt, and they're going after him because he's an outspoken conservative, which I don't quite understand. But what is most telling, Joy, is that, you know, we can speculate whether he knew he was under investigation when he asked for a pardon, but that's almost beside the point, because he clearly knew he had committed crimes, which is what prompts one to ask for a pardon. And the Supreme Court has actually given us some guidance that I think helps put what it means to ask for a pardon in context. In 1915, the Supreme Court said that a pardon carries with it an imputation of guilt, and accepting a pardon carries with it a confession of guilt. That's why a person cannot be forced to accept a pardon against his will. And, you know, it's asking for a pardon, you know, there are a couple of related concepts in the criminal law. There's consciousness of guilt, and there's an admission of guilt. Consciousness of guilt is like when you hide incriminating evidence. Consciousness of guilt. An admission of guilt is just that. Either when you come right out and say, I committed the crime, or you ask the president for a prospective pardon to wipe your entire life clean of all criminal activity. If I were ever prosecuting Matt Gaetz, Joy, you can bet I would seek to introduce the fact that he asked Donald Trump for a pardon into evidence as a direct admission of guilt, and then we would have some robust litigation. But I'll bet a judge would say, you know what, there's Supreme Court precedent that supports this argument, so I'm going to admit it into evidence.
Let me ask both of you this question. I'll ask you first, Glenn, and then Michael. With the on-air, on Fox, because, you know, people did communicate with Donald Trump through the TV, does that count if you were prosecuting this case? If he was on television asking for blanket pardons, which you could impute to me for himself?
Everything you say, whether in writing, whether orally, whether broadcast, whether in a tweet, is a potential admission. Any statement by a party opponent, any statement by a defendant that is relevant to the crime being tried is admissible as evidence. And listen, nobody was falling for him trying to masquerade the fact that he wanted a pardon by throwing into the mix the Thanksgiving turkey and Joe Exotic. I don't think Gaetz cared about those two particular animals or people. I think he wanted a pardon, and he was trying to put a little bit of window dressing on it, saying, let's give it to some other folks too, and maybe I'll get lost in the mix.
And Michael, you know, now that we do have this new information that there's added potential criminality, and we should say again he's denying it, but there is this new story out there. Can you just give us a specific on whether or not this request for pardon, was it formal or was it informal? Was it a formal request to White House officials, or was it an informal, this is something that I need?
So there is a formal pardons process where you go to the Justice Department and you have paperwork that is filled out, and that application goes in and it's examined by the pardons attorney. It's important to know that the Trump administration basically ignored that process throughout the administration, sort of relied on their own way of doing it. So there's no evidence that he went through the formal process, but in the sense that that doesn't mean anything in this case because there was a formal process that was relied on. The only thing I would say, just, you know, in terms of Gaetz is, look, he has not been charged yet. It's a federal investigation. We only know so much.
Dude, let Gaff go, bro.
As much as we can, but, you know, it could be early in this investigation.
I feel so bad for him, even though it's a stupid game.
He's been indicted on a range of charges. He faces a mandatory minimum of 12 years in prison. Federal authorities have a significant amount of leverage on him. Greenberg has hired a prominent Florida lawyer, Chris Scheller, to represent him in this case. And, you know, he has a status hearing tomorrow. So, you know, it's there's still a lot more investigation to go.
100%, and a lot more reporting. Really appreciate you, Michael Schmidt. I'm sure we're going to continue to learn more about this. Michael Schmidt, Glenn Kirshner, thank you both very much. And up next, wow, these Republicans think that they're so sneaky, trying to pass laws that seriously restrict voting rights while claiming the Democratic voting rights bill is a threat to constitutional sovereignty. No, we see you guys, you're not slick. Tonight's absolute worst is straight ahead.
Come on, baby.
Did you know the source of odor in your home could be all your soft surfaces? Odors get trapped in your home's fabrics and resurface over time. Febreze fabric pressure eliminates odors. Its water-based formula safely penetrates fabrics where odors hide. Spray it on your rugs, your curtains, your furniture, all over your home to make it part of your tidying up routine. Febreze fabric refresher for an all-over freshness you'll love.
Changing world true.
Hi, my name is Leanne. I have been going through some just stomach pains and problems for quite a while, and came across the Everly Well test. Everything was easy to understand, and was just really excited to see what the outcome would be, and come to find out that almonds were on my high sensitivity list. And so just was so eye-opening that even though I was eating clean, something within that clean list could potentially be causing me inflammation in my body. Thank you, Everly Well.
Every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. Now featuring written perspectives by experts you know and trust. For a better understanding of the stories that matter most, start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
Who's USAA made for? It's made for him, a veteran who honorably served. And it's made for her. She's serving now. We also make USAA for military spouses and their kids. Become a member. Get an insurance quote today. So Shave overpaid for this used car and decided to go undercover.
Remember, if you don't see me, you're not seeing the most accurate price. Shop at Carfax. You won't have to overpay on a used car again. Shop millions of great deals at the all-new Carfax.com.
I'm gonna text you when you're driving, man.
Kevin. He's not here, bro.
My body hair is pretty dark and thick, and I hate spending time maintaining it. That's why I use Flamingo. The ready-to-go wax strips are stress and mess-free. The results last longer than shaving. And sure, it's a quick ouch, but then it's done. Easy. Start waxing at shopflamingo.com.
You're clearly someone who takes care of yourself. So why wait to screen for colon cancer? Because when caught in early stages, it's more treatable. I'm Cologuard. I'm non-invasive and detect altered DNA in your stool to find 92% of colon cancers, even in early stages.
Tell me more.
It's for people 45 plus at average risk for colon cancer, not high risk. False positive and negative results may occur. Ask your prescriber or an online prescriber if Cologuard is right for you.
I'll do it.
Good plan.
Essential oil.
While Republicans whine about Dr. Seuss baseball, Mr. Potato Head, the existential threat the party is facing in the near future. And for years, they've relied on an American political system that reliably seesawed power back to their party during off-year midterm elections, which were characterized by a particular thing: low turnout. Specifically, Democrats and voters of color have tended to turn out in lower numbers during non-presidential elections. Then Donald Trump broke the GOP's Obama-era presidential losing streak, and his gross mismanagement, negligence, and racism just turbocharged an electorate that powered a Democratic whooping in the 2018 midterms and in 2020. Now, in the wake of this seismic shift, you would think that Republicans would have a come-to-Jesus moment and maybe think twice about following a guy who lost them the House and the Senate and the presidency. But no, that would make too much sense. Instead, they went for option B, trying to make voting harder. And they used Trump's delusional election lie as cover. But take a look at the Conservative National Review. It recently argued the Republic would be better served by having fewer, but better voters. We're seeing this play out across the country. Georgia's new law allows unlimited challenges to a voter's registration, requires ID for an absentee ballot, and expands the legislature's power over elections. Texas is considering a law that would, among other things, reduce early voting and prohibit drive-through voting. Unsurprisingly, the bills and laws target predominantly diverse communities. The Democrats in Washington are looking to put a stop to that with the For the People Act, which would expand voting rights, reduce the influence of money in politics, and limit partisan gerrymandering. Now, Republicans know that this bill makes sense. In fact, the New Yorker obtained a private phone call between policy advisors to Mitch McConnell and several conservative groups in which they conceded that the bill was so popular that it wasn't worth trying to mount a public advocacy campaign to shift opinion. Instead, opponents will be better off ignoring the will of the American voters and just trying to kill the bill in Congress, which explains the intellectually dishonest attacks that we've seen from Republican politicians against the bill.
It's the biggest power grab since I've been in Congress. It will take away every state's ability to run free and fair elections.
It sounds to me like the little red states like Mississippi, if this thing goes through, are going to be powerless.
I don't know that a Republican could ever win another national election. As long as I am serving as governor, I will stand up against those who seek to infringe or deny South Carolinians the constitutionally protected freedoms and liberties.
Governor McMaster, here's a good piece of advice by Princeton historian Kevin Cruz. Maybe you shouldn't use the state sovereignty argument as the Southern Manifesto, a manifesto that attacked the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education decision outlawing school segregation. So the politicians saw it as an abuse of judicial power that trespassed on states' rights. And there's another good piece of advice. This one is from our friend Ari Berman, reporter with Mother Jones. Maybe the National Review shouldn't be parroting arguments that echo James Kilpatrick, another conservative and fervent defender of segregation, who wrote in the very pages of the National Review in 1965 that, quote, over most of this century, the great bulk of Southern Negroes have been genuinely unqualified for the franchise. For all those reasons, anti-democracy is the honest reason.
But they send their regards.
And current Florida retiree says that
Tell your mom Paul we're very touched.
With the new Georgia law.
Just over here. Then we can arrange. This is real kind of y'all.
You saved the ranch. Paul said this is the least you can do.
Well, that's about everything.
Send your pa my best regards. Tell him he's got friends for life.
Bye, sir.
I can't believe this. It's so kind.
Sure. But there's still some more things that we need to get.
How about we take
I started investing when I was quite young, about 10 years old.
I have not started investing yet.
Let's go get the
Yes, I have invested.
It's something that I'm brand new to.
You are one handsome fellow, John.
I think an app would help if I had more education, knowledge, and information.
I invest to set up for my future.
Maybe not
Any
forever,
app
but
that would make my life much easier. Peace and love.
Make my life easier. That'd be amazing.
and now we got something to show for it. The ranch, this life. It's so nice, John.
What you doing?
Keeping track of my money.
On a napkin.
Gotta write it down.
Try Simplify by Cookin. It helps you stay on top of your money. It organizes your expenses, reminds you of upcoming bills, and gives you insights so you know how much to spend and save. But hey, if you have to write it down, how's that working out? Named the best budgeting app by the New York Times Wirecutter. Start your free trial today. Meet Greenlight Max, the simple way to teach your kids to earn, save, spend, and now, invest. Let time work its magic and show how small savings today can make a big difference in their futures. Download the Greenlight app so they can get started safely with you by their side. They'll research stocks to buy, you'll approve them. Because when every child learns how to build long-term wealth, we'll change the face of investing together. Try Greenlight Max for free when you join today.
Being great at a new language means being pretty bad for a while. And soon, you'll be something else. Rosetta Stone, how languages learn.
I have. When I shop for Big Brothers, I know intimidated
Decent or not, I think that's American.
Even if you isn't casual, you can do that and be confident. I love the idea of this. It's so simple.
You want to stare at a picture of yourself all day long? I hate to break it to you, but you ain't that much to look at.
I want a picture of us.
Is there anything else you want?
When you become a new parent, the world looks different. Suddenly, you are comfortable
contests. Also, more Mother Nature contests. It's why We Get Honest designed the new Clean Conscious Sticker, mindful of your babe's delicate skin and the environment. Use a single HR software? Nope. We use 11. 11. Why do an expense report from your phone when you can do it from a machine that jams?
I just emailed my wife's social security number to the entire company instead of HR. So, please come back.
How is your business software working for you? With Paycom, employees enter and manage their own HR data in one easy-to-use software. Visit paycom.com for a free demo.
Time. First off, we love each other.
I'll just put this here. Let me help you down.
Why are you being so courteous?
I don't know. There you go.
I'm gonna head to the Draper's for a minute. Won't take long, but I need to get some materials. You wanna come with me?
First of all, again, forgetting Donald Trump. My favorite argument about the Georgia law is the whining by all of these Southern Republican governors and also senators that it's not racist. Here it is. Cue the tape.
How is the bill even racist if you look at it with just any form of neutrality? I mean, you can't spin that at the White House or the courthouse or anywhere else around this country. I mean, it just does not add up.
The president has made a very serious accusation. He has said everybody who believes in having an ID, showing an ID before you vote, is a racist.
They play the race card morning, noon, and night.
I like this version of
I
it.
am tired of it.
It ain't you.
I think it's cheap.
Maybe I've changed.
I think it's sick. For the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who's been a friend for years, to say that what they're doing in Georgia is Jim Crow 2.0.
He's been a friend for years, except for when you were attacking his son, dude. You know, Ellie, and let's take them seriously for just one moment. I mean, we're just asking how many bubbles there are bars. So what does that have to do with race? Explain to these folks, please, for us. What's so racist about the Georgia law?
Yeah, I mean, there's math on this, right? Like, and I know that Lindsey Graham, that sick man, doesn't believe in math, but there's math on this, and we know that when we do things like voter IDs, when we close down early voting, when we stop mail-in voting, we know that it disproportionately affects black and brown people. That's just science, Lindsey. Look, all this is these, you know, when you look at something like the National Review article today from Ken Williamson, last seen advocating for women to be hanged if they seek an abortion, they didn't do anything new. Republicans are not doing anything new. They are Columbusing the idea that any white man with 2 ducats to scratch together has had since the founding of this country, and that is a hemisphere of their own. All they want is a hemisphere where white people are the only ones that matter. We have tried in the Constitution 4 times to stop them. The 15th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to black people. The 19th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to women. The 24th Amendment, which eliminated the poll tax. And the 26th Amendment, which dropped the voting age to 18. 4 times in the Constitution, we have tried to expand the franchise. And conservatives, where they call themselves Democrats in 1865 or MAGA in 2021, have tried to stop us. And they've always failed, and they're going to fail this time too.
And, you know, the thing about it is, you know, Michelle Goldberg, I'm old enough to remember when, you know, Ann Coulter used to, I don't know if she was joking or not, said women should lose the franchise because they vote too liberal and they just want all too much, you know, liberal stuff, you know. But there is this reality that Republicans are facing. That is demographic reality, right? They tended to do better in midterms because you had fewer people voting overall and you definitely had fewer people of color. And then all of a sudden 2018 happened and they're like, oh, we got to change all this because now these people are voting in midterms. Then you have a special election and all of these black people vote, and you know you get 2 Democratic congresspeople, senators in Georgia, and so they keep reshuffling the deck because Democrats figure out their system. And I wonder if there's any further. I mean, it seems like there's no further they can shuffle the deck.
That might be the way.
I think they can always find ways to go further. I mean, we're about to see what they're going to do in terms of this next round of redistricting. I'm sure that, this Georgia law is not going to be the last. And obviously it's no coincidence that they suddenly felt the need for this law after an election in which a representation that they seem to view as their divine right.
Excuse me?
I didn't say anything.
I just don't deserve it. And so all this.
Not very nice
I think
to me.
we're losing Michelle. Let's try to get Michelle's. We're going to try to get Michelle's sound back. If you just froze for a second, let me play for really quickly Mitch McConnell. This was in yesterday on whether corporations should get involved in politics. This is Rich.
Sure.
The warning, if you will, for corporate America is to stay out of politics.
What do I owe you?
It's not what you're designed for. Republicans drink Coca-Cola too.
I'll see you again.
Oh,
And we
yes,
fly.
he'll probably come in for a pose.
And we like baseball.
He seemed to
If I
enjoy
were
himself.
running a major corporation, I'd stay out of politics. I'm not talking about political contributions. I didn't say that very artfully yesterday. They're certainly entitled to be involved in politics. They are.
There is one thing I have
My
done.
principal complaint is they didn't read the darn bill.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle, I'm giving this to you since we lost your shot earlier. Oh my God, it's like, well, I really didn't mean that when it came to giving money to me.
Okay, so hopefully this works. But what's so amazing is that you were talking earlier about the For the People Act, and one of the things that the For the People Act wants to do is curtail the influence of corporate money in politics. And the reason that Republicans have been so consistently against this is because they insist that corporations are people with First Amendment rights. This has just been absolutely foundational to conservatism until corporations started out against their effort to restrict voting.
And also when they decided, we may not want sick people on our cruise ships. Also, you're not a person. You don't have a right to
Yeah, that's a good one. I like this one. That jump is dope.
Corporations aren't people. It's like they change their mind every time everything changes. Okay, very quickly before we go, Ellie, I know that you and I have both we've been talking offline about this, but Midwin Charles. We lost her shockingly. I think everyone is pretty shocked out there about her very untimely death. This was a young, vibrant, gorgeous, brilliant woman. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about her as well, because I know she meant a lot to you as a fellow lawyer, as a fellow TV lawyer, and somebody who advocates for all the good things, all the justice. I want to let you have an opportunity to talk a bit about her as well.
I just want to say really quickly how much of a warrior that we've really lost this week. Midwin, many people know her for her trenchant analysis on TV. I think the first time I met her was on your show. We were like the only three people who knew that Bill Barr was as bad as he seemed to be. But she was that person because she came from such a in the trenches kind of legal background. This was an amazingly credentialed woman. She's a clerk for the Sixth Circuit. She worked for Free Fake, one of the top 50 law firms in the country, and then stopped that world and put a lot of money on the table to go and help people. And so it's such a hard thing to lose. Midwin was one of those people that she's one of those lawyers that you call.
Wow.
Absolutely. And the Haitian American
Bitch ain't having it.
I know it's also really grieving right now. All my Haitian American friends have been calling and texting, and
that
it's
was
really
good one.
tragic. So we love you, and she is now our ancestor, and we love her, and we will hopefully her spirit will continue to stay with us. Thank you so much, Ellie Mescal, Michelle Goldberg. Thank you both. Okay. And up next, we're going to turn this now to a positive. St. Louis Mayor-elect Tashara Jones will be here. This is exciting to talk about her history-making victory last night and her plans for addressing racial and social injustice. Don't go anywhere. She's coming up next.
Oh, no. Come on.
You're
What
silly
you doing?
man, John
Keeping
Mars.
track of my money.
What about Jim Milton?
Oh, please
Gotta write it down.
worse.
Try Simplify by Quicken. It helps you stay on top of your money. It organizes your expenses, reminds you of upcoming bills, and gives you insights so you know how much to spend and save. But hey, if you have to write it down, how's that working out?
I like
Named the best budgeting app by the New York Times Wirecutter. Start your free trial today.
It's here. It's super empty. I'm going to open the box. The exciting part. Hungry. Okay.
I hope they don't
And my
think
refrigerator.
Moms, let's talk life insurance. I know it sounds like an awkward conversation, but it shouldn't be. Life insurance from Jenny Life was made for all of us who worry about our families, have kids to protect, and who are on a budget. With Jenny Life, you have one less thing to worry about. Because for $1 a day, you can be covered for up to $500,000. And getting that policy is easy. Plus, there are no bans.
I am married to you.
No, I mean,
Peace of mind isn't an awkward conversation. Visit jennylife.com to get your life insurance policy today.
Why would your kids need a green light debit card? Imagine a debit card and app designed to help them develop healthy financial habits, to teach them how to save and encourage them to set their own goals. Now imagine the difference it could make in their lives, in their future.
Serious?
Green light.
It'll make me very happy.
This is the sound of
Live
greatness.
a lot of lives.
No shortcuts.
Let's just live this one from now on.
So,
You and me,
see,
Jack,
being great
the family,
means being pretty
my
bad
mom.
for a while.
John,
And soon, you'll be something else.
I didn't know it mattered to you.
Speaking a new language. Rosetta Stone. How
Now it does.
is learned.
I don't know much about this. I don't have much
I think
experience
this is
investing.
So I haven't had any experience investing before. I don't know much about investing, but my dad
Shut up,
always
you're
tells
silly
me
man,
what
kiss
for
me.
the future.
I wish I could educate myself more.
I feel like there's a lot of people who would be interested. We just don't know where to start.
I would love to learn how to invest, see what I can take.
That's the most play you get in this entire game. Goodness.
The world looks different. Suddenly, you're blowout conscious. More comfort conscious. But also, Mother Nature conscious. It's why we at Honest designed the new Clean Conscious diaper, mindful of your babe's delicate skin and the environment, with unique features for every stage. So you can be more adventure conscious, in the moment conscious, and of course, more clean conscious.
I love Made In. I love what Made In represents. With the product, you could tell that there's extreme craftsmanship.
You would think a pan is a pan until Made In came along, and I went, wow, these things are something better.
The pots and pans that I'm using on an everyday basis are going to create wonderful products in my kitchen.
Those are the pans that we use at Olympia. We're going to have the best pans in the world at one of the best restaurants in the world. Stress-free for $100 off.
As a city, we've been surviving. We've suffered disinvestment, decades of violence, broken promises from our city's leaders. It's time for St. Louis to thrive. It's time for St. Louis to thrive. It's time to bring a breath of fresh air to our neighborhood.
Last night, the city of St. Louis elected its first black woman mayor, City Treasurer Tashara Jones. Jones ran a progressive platform promising to direct the city's coronavirus aid towards rental and mortgage assistance, as well as resources for those reallocating its budget toward investments in substance abuse and mental health services. St. Louis leads the entire country in police killings per capita, and the city had its highest homicide rate in 50 years in 2020. So it's quite a big job that she has ahead of her, but I am very excited to be joined now by St. Louis Mayor-elect Tashara Jones. Lots of people wanted to talk to you tonight, so I'm really grateful that you are going to spend some time with us for a few minutes with us tonight. So let's just get started. Congratulations, first of all, on your victory, and let's dig into what you have ahead of you. Coronavirus cases in St. Louis, more than 22,000, nearly 23,000, and 458 deaths. Very high poverty rate, 21.8%. How do you even begin to dig into all of that? Well, Joy, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here this evening. You know, we have to tackle our problems one by one. I think the other thing that we have to, that's within these numbers is St. Louis is one of the most hyper-segregated cities in the country. We are known for the Del Mar divide, and people that live north of Del Mar, 90% of the people that live north of Del Mar are African American. And the first 12 coronavirus deaths were all black people. So, you know, we have totally neglected over half of our city, and we cannot expect it to thrive if half of it is left to fend for itself. And we've now passed at least the big stimulus bill. And now there's talk of a big transportation bill. What could an infusion of federal money that could end up in your city, what could it do? Or what could you do with that?
Yeah, I'll ride with you.
And that could totally turn St. Louis around. We have been saving money from local tax that we passed to expand our MetroLink. And this infrastructure bill could be huge for us to make sure that we can finally finish this project. We've updated the study to make sure that we are ready to be back in the pipeline for federal funding. And also, like I said, our city has a lot of poverty, and that's why we got so much money.
This is it.
And so this is going to be a huge shot in the arm to make sure that our people can not only survive but thrive. Yeah,
I ain't got no other choice.
On the Derek Chauvin case, but also on other police brutality cases. There was one sort of infamous one in the city of St. Louis where.
Oh, shut up, Abigail.
Let's go kill this son of a bitch.
Obviously, St. Louis is not far from Ferguson. Getting your arms around criminal justice, what kinds of reforms can you do as mayor? Well, I think we have to address the elephant in the room, Joy.
Fuck, bitch. You know what I'm saying?
Police in St. Louis, the black officers and the white officers. And so if they can't trust each other, then how can they expect the public to trust the police? So we have to have these hard, uncomfortable...
With the rat face thing.
Satan, Arthur, save you, girl. I will avenge Arthur. The fuck?
We have to embrace that
I don't give a fuck.
And uncomfortable truth, and also embrace it so we can move forward. Yeah, and I can't get away from the other element of the room is that, you as a black woman are a rarity in terms of being a mayor in a major city like the one you're in. Talk about what that representation means. I know what it means to me to see you, but what does that representation mean in your view? I think it also means a huge representation for single moms. I am a single mother, the most adorable 13-year-old son. And he is the reason for a lot of the things that I do in politics. I want to build a St. Louis where he is able to walk across the street to my father's house without fear of being shot at or pulled a gun on, which has happened to him. I want a St. Louis where he's not afraid of police officers, because once he found out, what the mayor does and that, the mayor's over the police, he immediately said to me, well, that means I'll be safe. His mother doesn't have to become mayor for him to feel safe around police officers, or neither should any child. Yeah, absolutely. Those are inspiring words. I'm inspired by you. St. Louis Mayor-elect Tashara Jones, congratulations. I know that you're going to do great things. Very, very lucky, City of St. Louis. I think they're very happy. They should be very happy to have you. So, congratulations. Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much. Well, that ended on an inspirational note. That is the readout tonight. All over the Christmas starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
These new Jim Crow laws are just antithetical to who we are.
The backlash to the big lie continues as Republicans give up the game.
So think about all these college university students now who are registered to vote, never uninformed citizens who may not be prepared or ready to vote.
Tonight, how everything old is new again down south.
This bill, H.R. 1, threatens the constitutional sovereignty of the state of South Carolina.
Then new calls for a January 6th commission as reports of plea deals surface and the attempt to launder an insurrection continues.
They wandered freely through the Capitol like it was their building or something.
Plus, Congresswoman Katie Porter on the jaw-dropping new Trump fundraising scam. And who needs a blanket pardon when you can have a disgraced, twice impeached character witness?
The denial was not only a denial, it was a...
Today's testimony, more cops taking the stand against former officer Derek Chauvin.
In your opinion, does defendant's use of force during that time period need to be reasonable within the entire time period?
Yes. But one of the more significant exchanges came when Special Agent James Ryerson took the stand, an agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension that led the investigation into the events of May 25th. The defense played in a video on the scene.
Published Exhibit 1007, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that? Yes. Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many drugs?
But minutes later, prosecutors played a longer clip from the same video.
Let's hang the bastard.
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, I ate too many drugs. It's a little different than what you were asked about when you saw a portion of it.
Yes, sir. A key moment, as one of the defense's main theories is that Floyd died largely from drugs in his system combined with his medical history. Earlier in the day, Sergeant Jody Steiger with the Los Angeles Police Department was called by prosecutors as a use of force expert and testified, like others have, the force Derek Chauvin used on George Floyd was excessive.
He was in the prone position, he was handcuffed, he was not attempting to resist, and he was not attempting to assault the officers, kick, punch, or anything of that nature. Officers are...
The Chauvin's attorney, during cross-examination, focused on what could have happened, specifically one of their central arguments, that the growing crowd became a perceived threat and distracted Chauvin.
And when someone starts threatening you, it's a possibility that an officer can view that as potential deadly assault is about to happen. That's what they're trained. Yes, that's what they're trained.
But during prosecutor questioning,
I did not perceive them as being a threat. Why is that? Because they were merely filming, and they were, most of it was their concern for Mr. Floyd.
The defense also moved to show there were points where Chauvin's knee may not have been on the neck, but on some portions of the shoulder. Prosecutors called the placement irrelevant.
Is the risk related to the pressure on the neck or the pressure on the body? Is the pressure on the body, any additional pressure on the body, complicated breathing more so than if there was no pressure at all?
And on that portion of the videos that played surrounding whether George Floyd actually said, I ate too many drugs, we've listened to it many times, and it is difficult to make out what is actually being said. But let's also keep in mind that the people that really matter here are the jurors that are inside that courtroom. And their attention has faded in and out over recent days, as reports from inside the courtroom have indicated, especially when you consider the change from the more gripping bystander testimony of last week to the now more detail-oriented expert testimony. There was one example.
Wow, bitch! Hang your little punk ass.
That portion of the videos is being played, and people are trying to figure out what's being said. Jurors perked up. They've been taking notes expeditiously as they have over the course of this week. But again, they are the ones that really matter in this, as closely as everyone on the outside has been watching as well.
Invalid Congressman Matt Gaetz in search of support and getting a return favor from the man he spent years defending and praising.
President Trump sometimes raises his voice and a ruckus. He knows that's what it takes to raise an army of patriots who love America and will protect her.
Former President Donald Trump weighing in publicly for the first time on the scandal surrounding one of his most loyal allies on Capitol Hill. Trump responding to reports confirmed by CNN that the Florida congressman approached allies to the president requesting a preemptive blanket pardon for himself before Trump left the White House. Trump today denying Gaetz ever asked him personally for a pardon, then saying, quote, it must be remembered that he has totally denied the accusations against him. It is a
I see him.
and it is a lie. In his short time in Washington, the Florida congressman has gone out of his way to attach himself to Trump, as demonstrated in the 2020 HBO documentary, The Swamp.
Hey, Mr. President, it's Matt Gaetz. I don't need anything, sir. Just calling to tell you did a great job today. Don't let these people get you down. We're going to keep fighting for you with all we got.
Gates defending Trump, even when some Republicans were unwilling.
My fellow patriots, don't be shy and don't be sorry. Join me as we proudly represent the pro-Trump America First wing of the conservative movement.
Madam Speaker, Gates went to the House floor after the deadly insurrection and claimed without evidence that it was groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa to blame for the violence, not Trump.
This morning, President Trump explicitly called for demonstrations and protests to be peaceful. He was far more, you can moan and groan, but he was far more explicit about his calls for peace than some of the BLM and left-wing rioters were this summer when we saw violence sweep across this nation.
Come on, John.
First impeachment inquiry, Gates and a group of House Republicans busted into a secure meeting in an attempt to reveal classified information about the investigation into Trump's conduct.
If behind those doors they intend to overturn the results of an American presidential election, we want to know what's going on. And it's only reasonable that we would have questions.
He has also battled his fellow Republicans, those he deems not loyal enough to the Trump MAGA movement. Gates traveled to Wyoming to attack fellow GOP Representative Liz Cheney, who voted to impeach Trump after the insurrection.
You can send a representative who actually represents you, and you can send Liz Cheney home, back home to Washington, D.C.
And while former President Trump is offering Gates a modicum of support, it is far from enthusiastic. In fact, sources tell CNN that the former president is being advised to stay away from the Gates scandal. Meanwhile, the congressman showing no signs of backing away. He has sent out multiple fundraising appeals based on this scandal. And Wolf is expected to reappear in public for the first time on Friday, speaking at a summit that will be held, of course, at Trump National Golf Course in Doral, Florida.
Here's to the music. Our mothers always knew you were magic, black and beautiful. And you say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So beauty, behold.
You go like this. Go like
What the heck going on?
You walk. What am I supposed to do? Put his words here. You walk. He'll dance.
Come on.
Go like this. Go like this.
Come on, I had him.
You want to see them, feel them, smell them. Look at the beauty of this raffle. See why I need to come to zoo? Because you bring your children here, you get to see this. Not everyone can go to Africa and North Pole, South Pole. It's a race against the clock. In a race for survival. Folks who go in here, go that long, they go home.
Disgusting, huh? Oh, she's gorgeous. Oh, I see.
What we do with her is we go in.
How are you, sir?
Don't touch this. I say happy. This is cane code, everybody. All right? If you notice, there's a poison there. When you hop on this, there's a cane code. Now, those are here poison gland. This code there is the one that came over South America. Probably in this country, southern Florida.
More contagious coronavirus variant first found in the UK now dominates here in the US.
It is the most common lineage, period.
And it's fueled an upswing of new cases and hospital admissions. Just 5 states account for 43% of all new cases this past week. But the nation's daily death toll still falling.
Bitch.
The CDC says that's down to vaccinations, particularly among the elderly. Last night, a bold prediction from the White House on the vax front.
By the weekend, half the adults in the country will have had their first shot.
Over-optimistic? This morning, confirmation. Yeah, it was.
Sometime, likely this month, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to get to about half.
CNN analysis shows some states like New York might vaccinate all willing adults by mid-June. Some other states, like Georgia, might be the end of the year. The president remains cautious.
We are at the finish line.
So where is that finish line?
We'll know it when we see it. It'll be obvious as the numbers come down rather dramatically. It's on the way. Hang in there.
I will be going to karaoke as often and as much as I can.
This 95-year-old veteran COVID survivor, Bon Jovi fan, is ready.
What's that one about the cowboy and the motorcycle? Wanda dead or alive.
Did you know that your toughest cleaning problems can be caused by hard water metals? They lock in residues like a glue on your hard surfaces and fabrics. Try 9 Elements. Its vinegar-powered deep clean dissolves hard water buildup and releases trapped residues and odors like detoxifying your clothes. Made with never more than 9 ingredients. 9 Elements. More than clean, cleanse.
Now, since I announced this plan, I've heard from my Republican friends say that many of them say it's too big. They say, why not focus on traditional infrastructure? Fix what we've already got. The roads and the highways that exist and the bridges. I'm happy to have that debate. But I want to tell you my view. We are America. We don't just fix for the day. We build for tomorrow. 200 years ago, trains weren't traditional infrastructure either. Until America made a choice to lay down tracks across the country. Highways weren't traditional infrastructure. Until we allowed ourselves to imagine that roads could connect our nation across state lines. The idea of infrastructure has always evolved to meet the aspirations of the American people and their needs. And it's evolving again today. We need to start seeing infrastructure feel its effect on the lives of working people in America. What is the foundation today that they need?
Really? Nothing?
Their place in the middle class to make it, to live, to go to work, to raise their families with dignity, to ensure that good jobs will be there for their kids, no matter who they are or what zip code they live in. That's what infrastructure means in the 21st century. It still depends on roads and bridges, ports and airports, rail and mass transit. But it also depends on having reliable, high-speed internet.
Well, I need some, my lady.
Because today's high-speed
Because I ain't got no more snacks.
It depends
Health
on
cure, needed that.
A grid that won't collapse in a winter storm or be compromised by hackers at home or abroad. It's
Yeah, I know.
Investing in made-in-America goods from every American community, including those that have historically been left out. Black, Latino, Asian American, Native Americans, rural communities.
Charles, stay with him. Charles, you worry about yourself. I'll be up there in a minute. Ain't you got a habit of just showing up? I got something to take care of, sure. Just you left, is it? Yeah. Just me. I ain't here to leave. Just Mike. So get out of my way. Make it quick. You ain't getting any further than that. I was kind of hoping you'd say that. That was Joe. We gotta be close.
Curious. What something the president really thought or thinks of Matt Gaetz? Is it reciprocal? So the former president's first impulse of the public several people after this story broke in the New York Times about how his insurance came out with the voter investigation. His first impulse was that he wanted to defend Gaetz and one of our people. Several of his advisors were told him that's a very bad idea. That the nature of what Gaetz is being investigated for is so serious that this is not something that the former president Trump should be out there alone. He does not have Twitter anymore, so it's not as if he can just go out and do what he wants. So far, they have been successful in keeping him away. Trump did like Gaetz. Gaetz was a very full-throated supporter of Trump. He was defending him during impeachment. He tried to defend him again during the second impeachment. Trump personally likes him. Trump's staff has always had issues with him.
And now that we know about the investigation, some of Matt Gaetz' votes in Congress seem misplaced. I mean, they were curious at the time, but now, in the light of day, he was the only vote in 2017 against a human trafficking law. Okay? Now, out of everybody in Congress, he was the only person who didn't like this human trafficking law. And now, more recently, we know that he was one of only 2 congressmen to vote against this 2008, more recent, this vote against revenge porn.
It's, Allison, the timing of, the nature of those votes, as you say, is raising lots of questions now in hindsight. Certainly, in both cases, the revenge porn one, especially because he defended a former colleague, Katie Hill, a Democrat, who had photos of herself leaked publicly, and she has now said that if these charges or these claims about Gaetz are correct, that he should resign. He was showing people pictures in Congress, his colleagues, and naked women. But relatedly, the child trafficking, the sex trafficking bill, it is really, really worth noting because this is an issue, obviously, that was bipartisan. It was bipartisan across the board in terms of him being the only one. And this is an issue that Republicans, in particular, over the last few years, during the Trump era, have pointed to over and over again. So his decision to vote against it is really important. Well, will California have the date? June 15th. The governor says he is pretty confident this state will be able to reopen for, as he puts it, business as usual. Now, this is a big deal because California, if you remember, was the first state to implement a statewide lockdown due to COVID. That was more than a year ago. The state has also suffered more cases, more deaths than any other state. But today, it's all optimistic cliches. Business as usual. Like the end of the tunnel. If case counts remain low and the vaccine supply remains high, then the governor says June 15th there will be no more COVID blueprint, no more using red, orange tears. Take a listen to the governor. We're seeing death rates, mortality rates go down. We're seeing case rates stabilize. We have the lowest case rates in the United States of America. Now, of course, Governor Newsom, like many other governors around the country, has been under some political pressure to reopen, but today he said he is sticking with the science, and the science says things are looking good.
It doesn't mean that masks are going away in California, right?
Absolutely not. Masks, he made explicitly clear, are staying. You know, for months we've been listening to a lot of experts saying that masks are actually our best way back to normality. We can live pretty normal lives if we are masked. You know, the governor also made it clear that this is not mission accomplished, as he put it. He said that the virus has been suppressed, it has not been beaten, and that there will be challenges ahead. He is, as you mentioned, Wolf, sticking with the mask, but he's going to reopen business.
Absolutely right. Thanks very much, Nick.
It has become a new front in the culture war. Republicans across the country are pushing to ban transgender students.
Nothing to eat out here, bro? Come on, man. Yes. Oh, coffee, bro. Sit.
From competing in school sports.
Lotion.
Republican Governor Kristi Noem rejected a bill that would have barred transgender athletes from sports. But under pressure from social conservatives, they were issued 2 executive orders that effectively ban trans girls from competing.
Clearly, each and every one of us as men and women have exceptional gifts and differences. They should be celebrated. But those differences are very real, and the physical differences are very real.
One ordering all girls who want to play in girls' sports to present a birth certificate showing they were assigned female at birth. This is playing out in Republican-led states across the country. More than 25 now considering anti-trans sports in K-12 and college, according to the Human Rights Campaign. 3 of those states have already signed them into law.
High-profile activists are pushing back. As someone who has played sports with someone who is trans, I can tell you all is well. Nothing is spontaneously combusting.
Soccer star Megan Rapinoe penning this op-ed in the Washington Post, saying these bills are attempting to solve a problem that doesn't exist. That point has been understood in state travel.
How many girls in Georgia have been denied opportunity because of transgender athletes participating in sports?
So, obviously, there's not a lot of statistics on that.
So there are none in Georgia.
Yeah, I don't have any.
Thank you.
As Republicans, in addition to socially conservative organizations pushing for the ban, have been unable to point to any evidence of a problem.
Will you cite any examples where a young woman was denied a spot?
Thank you for telling me y'all down there.
Not outside of Arizona, not anecdotally in another state, but here specifically in Arizona, because they were competing against a trans athlete who outperformed.
I can't at this point rest assured, and as the parents of transgender kids make impassioned pleas against the bans.
I need you to understand that this language, if it becomes law, will have real effects on real people. It will affect my daughter. It will mean she cannot play on the girls' volleyball team, the dance squad, or tennis team.
Simon Servani, CNN, Washington.
Think of that as golf tournament should be moved out of the working.
I think that's up to the masters. Look, it was reassuring to see that for-profit operations and businesses are speaking up about how these new Jim Crow laws are just antithetical to who we are. There's another side of it too. The other side of it too is when they in fact move out of Georgia, the people who need the help the most, people making quality wages, sometimes get hurt the most. I think it's a very tough decision for a corporation to make, or a group to make. But I respect them when they make that judgment, and I support whatever judgment they make. But it's the best way to deal with this is for Georgia and other states to smarten up. Stop it. Stop it. Stop the idea of people.
Didn't reckon I should waste my time killing you. But I felt different. So it seems. Well, maybe after all this is over, I'll go pay her a call.
Laundry isn't done until it's done,
And
Danny.
boy, whatever you say.
¿Te dejaron todo botado? ¿No viene tu mamá y tu papá con nadie? ¿Viene con tu mamá o tu papá? ¿Te dejaron botado y te dijeron que vinieras a pedir auxilio?
No, yo me disculpé, no voy a
It's just like old times.
Okay.
Turn around.
The tentacles of a different form of warfare are legion into Iraqi society. Far too many are susceptible. When joy, happiness, a vision for the future is
Hello, son. Mrs. Adler. It's been quite a while.
Officials say the drug network's affairs has grown more complex over the last few years, and as of late, recruiting more women. Soraya, her husband, and the man she refers to as their friend, smuggled, sold, and used crystal meth.
What were you saying?
The friend would get it from the Iranian border, from the big dealers, she says.
Once more.
They used her mostly to smuggle their drug stash through checkpoints that she would try to end and women here are trying not to get services.
Let her go. No, I can't do that, John.
They were all captured in a house they were selling out of, with around $18,000 worth of crystal meth.
Come on now.
Iraq's anti-drug unit, which officials say is undermanned and underfunded, has yet to make what they would consider a significant bust. Their biggest seizures are in the country's south, close to the border with Iran, the main transit point for crystal meth. The era of COVID-19 has resulted in a surge in demand, General Imad Hussein with the anti-drug unit tells us. More unemployment, more frustrated youth idling in the streets, more
Let her go!
The drug dealers will give someone a hit or two for free, General Hussein explains. Once they are hooked, they often start to deal themselves to finance their own addiction. The unit has intelligence that dealers are active against narcotics.
They have about 5 or 6.
General Hussein chats with people, giving them a hotline number for tips. They get from every day, and tries to ease some of the distress that exists between the population and the security forces. He compares the booming drug trade to another face of terrorism. The era of traditional war with two armies facing each other is over, he says.
The enemies of Iraq are also using drugs to destroy the core of our society, our youth.
Too much to say, no more.
The anti-drug department prison in Baghdad's Western District is full.
You shot me.
Each cell is meant to hold 30, but there are more than 50 men here, dealers and addicts.
You shot me
Up
pretty
until
good.
2016, Khalid says he had steady work as a security officer. Then this he woke up and realized friends pushed him to try crystal meth.
هذا شيء زين لنفسي لحد ما طبيت يعني بعد رجعت.
The love of his life left him.
يعني ما في يوم ما أتذكر أيام حلوة وهذا.
Khalid's cellmate Mahmoud, who agreed to show his face on camera, says he ended up stealing from his elderly mother to fund his crystal meth habit.
Crazy. I hope so. Help me up. Let's go get Charles.
Here's money. Lots of money. In the cabin. Black. Hurry up. I'm waiting on you.
Each appeal coming through on Inez's Facebook page is one more person she hopes she can help recover. One more drug addict she can keep out of prison. This is a message from a teenager in Basra. He writes that he's 15 years old, that he wants treatment, that he wants to get better, but he doesn't know what to do. Inez, a middle school biology teacher who realized that some of her students were using, is trying to raise awareness about the options that exist for addicts. Many users who want to recover are afraid the authorities will just detain them. What most don't know is that if they willingly go to rehab, there are no legal repercussions under Iraqi law.
المخدرات ثلاث طرق لها مصحة سجن وموت ما في طريقة رابعة.
Jack, Uncle, come out
The
here!
guys at this rehab center are old. The doctors here tell us they have to cycle out patients. The man says he used to drive a tuk-tuk. One of his passengers offered him crystal meth, and
It's over, Abigail.
He was hooked.
It's all over.
His parents found him with a gun to his head because he was having hallucinations that people were coming at him and ordering him to kill himself. Ahmed was discharged 2 days ago, but he says he still has cravings. His mother is too afraid to take him back home to
where the sun burns in. Each season come and come around.
Game over, baby.
Right here.
When high, Ahmed at times would set things on fire.
Turns to dust. Bodies never rush.
Crystal meth, he says, made him feel powerful, like there was no limit to what he could achieve. A tantalizing state of mind in a country that has repeatedly shackled its own youth, and now risks losing more of it to addiction. Arwa Damon, Sienna,
Reached your destination.
Almost reached you home. Raising your boy.
Yes, ma'am. Never.
Good.
Anyway, I thought you liked this place.
the Subaru Outback. Dog tested, not approved.
Navalny, I understand, is continuing his hunger strike in prison. What are you learning?
Yeah, he's continuing that tonight. He's lost a lot of weight, but his health is also getting much worse. The latest we've heard from him is that he's got a high temperature, he's coughing hard. Not a good sign, of course, in the time of the pandemic of COVID. But he's also saying that there's lots of people in his prison colony that have got tuberculosis, TB, and so he's very concerned about that as well. You add that on top of the other health concerns that Alexei Navalny has been reporting. His bad back,
his lack of sensitivity in both of his legs, possibly caused by neurological damage as a result of that dreadful nerve agent poisoning that he suffered in August last year. And you start to build up a really sort of negative, worrying picture about the health and the deteriorating health of Russia's most prominent opposition figure. Now, those in power, those enemies of Alexei Navalny in Russia, they're pushing back hard on this idea that he's kind of like deteriorating dramatically. There's been video released on Russian state television showing him walking around his prison dormitory, drinking a cup of tea, chatting to a prison guard. That was released just a couple of days after he complained about being incapacitated with his bad back and his weak legs. There's been pictures of him sleeping in his bed, being quietly videotaped at night by a prison employee. That follows allegations that he'd been making, that he's woken up every hour and that his sleep deprivation is tantamount to torture, and that's having a negative impact, he says, on his health as well. And so there's all sorts of things that are playing out now here, with the one side, the Navalny side, saying he needs medical attention. There was a protest outside his penal colony today, with doctors gathering out there demanding access to him. And on the other side, the authorities saying that actually he's getting all the medical attention he needs, and he's just being treated like any other prisoner would be.
Matthew, I understand you were briefly detained at that pro-Navalny protest earlier this morning, along with some protesters, other journalists. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, I mean, look, the authorities, they allowed this protest to go on right outside the penal colony for several hours. But then they lost patience. They just moved through the crowds of journalists and protesters and Navalny supporters who had gathered there, and just started putting people into the police bus and taking them away. One of them was Anastasia Vasilva. She's the head of the doctors' union. She's basically Navalny's doctor, who was sort of spearheading this doctors' protest this evening. I was picked up along with my cameraman, Jeff Keel, put into the bus along with a couple of other journalists. We were then taken to the police station and had documents checked, and about 3 hours later we were set free and allowed to continue with our work. But, you know, it certainly was a sign of just how impatient the authorities can become when it comes to protesting the treatment of Alexei Navalny or covering it.
Ron hadn't just been participating in key research. It sounded like he was leading it.
Yeah, so thinking back on it, like, it was basically 3 years of intelligence training, teaching normies how to do intelligence work. It's basically what I was doing honestly before, but never as cute.
See that smile? Ron had slipped up. He knew it, and I knew it. And after 3 tireless years of cat and mouse, well...
Never as cute, I promise. Never. Because I am not cute. It never was.
And Colin Novak joins me now. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I really was so fascinated by your documentary. I mean, your access, it's incredible how much time and how deep you got into this. For those who may be confused as to why that moment was so shocking, can you lay out briefly who this guy Ron Watkins is, what his role in the QAnon origin story is, and why that revelation from him was so important?
Sure, yeah. So the person I'm talking to is Ron Watkins, aka Code Monkey. He is someone who has been named in the Q, drops QAnon's drops. So there's a lot of lore around this character in the world of QAnon. He is also the admin of the site where he posts. You know, I had spent years playing cat and mouse with this character. You know, I thought that it was possible that, you know, he would know more about Q than anyone else because Q posts on his site. And I had always been waiting for that moment where Ron slips up. And the first time it happened was a few months ago. And I think it happened as a result of the kind of super optimism, where he had just gotten away with it for so long, he wasn't really watching his words. And you can see in the clip that you just played, he actually breaks into a smile before before I do, because he realized what had just happened. And I think you can kind of hear him muttering under his breath. And I just remember when Ron said that, I looked over afterwards. I looked over at my camera person. I was just like, he just admitted he's Q. I couldn't, for me, it was just a mind blow.
It's often one of those moments where you just pray that the camera person is actually rolling, that there is, like, record was on, and that everything actually is been. You said in the clip you've been talking to Watkins, and what was going through your mind? I mean, did he say more about it later? I mean, he clearly, he continues to deny he was Q, right?
Well, he'll always deny that he's Q, because I think he would be concerned about any potential legal ramifications with it. But I also think that deep down he kind of wants the credit.
Yeah.
And I saw this at various moments along the way, where I think he would kind of give me nudges, sort of hint that, yeah, he's behind it, but he can't really say it.
It's also so remarkable when, there's all these people out there who, for one reason or another, for whatever in their lives has brought them to, go down this rabbit hole, believe that Q is early on, that he was a member of the Trump administration, that he was a high-level intelligence official with this special magical Q clearance, that, he had access to, and all the things that Q predicted was going to happen just never happened, and was continually proven wrong. And yet, these people still continued to believe and just came up with new explanations for why everything he said was wrong. The fact that it might be this guy, of course it's like somebody like this and not, some intelligence official somewhere.
Well, I mean, Ron Watkins has all of the money. He's interested in quote unquote red pilling the masses, which is getting his worldview out to people. He doesn't like the mainstream media, and he was trying to build an audience. And I think to some extent he and his father also are kind of interested in taking over the world. So, it checks out. But I would say that and you see this in the story, that even though Ron is, I believe, the linchpin of all of this, there is this broader network. And over time, you did see figures like General Flynn. You'll see another general who's stealing intel.
Damn it!
YouTubers, these people who sort of preach the word of Q on YouTube and make sense of it to their followers. And you see that this group of ex-military actors are leveraging Q and hijacking the narrative for their own ends.
John Cena and Nicole Byer host. All new episodes of Wipeout Thursdays at 9 on TBS.
There's thousands of people that die every year because of these defects in their airway, and we have struggled for well over half a century to try to find a way to remedy it.
I must go, sir. Last chance for sales. You are on thin ice with me. Let's do business, or you move on.
Can you give me 5 minutes of me getting that good? Breath in. You make my life good.
Oh, sure, why not? What's a little giveaway, huh? What do you make us with?
It feels so easy to breathe. It felt like the whole universe just went inside of me and said, heal, accept it. And I happy.
Yes, sir.
Today's testimony, more cops taking the stand against former officer Eric Chauvin.
In your opinion, does defendant's use of force during that time period need to be reasonable within the entire time period?
Yes.
But one of the more significant exchanges came when Special Agent James Ryerson took the stand, an agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension that led the investigation into the events of May 25th. The defense played him video from the scene.
Publish Exhibit 1007, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many drugs?
Yes.
But minutes later, prosecutors played a longer clip from the same video.
Having heard it in context, you're able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there.
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd is saying, I ate too many drugs.
So it's a little different than what you were asked about when we saw a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
A key moment, as one of the defense's main theories is that Floyd died largely from drugs in his system combined with his medical history. Earlier in the day, Sergeant Jody Steiger with the Los Angeles Police Department was called by prosecutors